Say a word of our first reading today, which we get every year. The Easter season, the readings are always the same. There's not a rotation from one year to one, year two. But the passage points to really two really important principles in Catholic social teaching. The church has has written a lot on social teaching. The church has a vast and rich social teaching. It can be found in, many of the encyclicals, Rerum Novarum, Santissimus Annus. But if you just want to look in one spot, there's a compendium on Catholic social teaching, which is just a small little book, similar to the Catechism, kind of sums everything up, but it's a lot smaller than the Catechism. But the two principles here that come out from the first reading from the fourth chapter in Acts is solidarity and subsidiarity. Two very, very important principles in Catholic social teaching. And both of the principles, subsidiarity and solidarity, both get its launching off point from the dignity of the human person, right? So it's like the spot to start. That every human person has dignity, and solidarity. You sum it up by just talking about it gets to the interconnectedness of all people. That we're all intertwined. The human race is, and you see that in our first reading. It starts off and says this community was what? This community was together, and they were of one mind and one heart. It shows that solidarity between all the people. And, what the result of that is this deep care for one another. John Paul II wrote this. He says, solidarity is not a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortunes of so many people, both near and far. On the contrary, it is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. That is to say, to the good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all. That is extremely challenging. But that's the principle of solidarity. And that is a critical, it's scripture. It's what we see here. And it's a very important principle in Catholic social teaching. And that all lives are gifts from God, and so we have an obligation to give of ourselves to others. What's the fruit of that is you see a community here in the first reading that says what? There was no needy person among them. Like, hear that. There was no needy person among them. It goes on and says, for those who own property or houses would sell them and bring the proceeds of the sale and put them at the feet of the apostles, and they were distributed to each according to need. Dang. Now, so as we're sitting here, we don't have alarms go off of like Karl Marx and socialism and communism. There's a difference between voluntary charity versus mandatory charity. Mandatory charity, well, that contradicts each other. There's no such thing as mandatory charity. But the mandatory part is communism and socialism, which the church has condemned over and over and over and over again. Voluntary charity, to the point of what we see in Acts chapter 4 here, where there was no needy person among them, man, that's wild. To the extent now, but here's the two-pronged part of the other thing we see. Of solidarity is great, important principle, but it's incomplete without the practice of subsidiarity, which is the other important principle here in Catholic social teaching. And subsidiarity is the idea that solutions should be as local as possible and as large scale as necessary. The principle of subsidiarity. So if my neighbor needs help with something and I have the knowledge and the ability to help them, my neighbor, I can't go run to someone else who has more authority, who's farther away from the situation for the problem. Instead, it's my responsibility, right? So it's, again, subsidiarity is the idea that solutions should be as local as possible and as large of a scale as necessary. So it's bringing it closer to home. And so maybe just for us to think and look at our own, let's look at our own community. Let's have our hearts be convicted here from Acts chapter 4, our first reading today, on those two principles of Catholic social teaching. Solidarity, Clarendon Hills, Downers Grove, Westmont. Let's have that sense of solidarity and also subsidiarity to help those that are in need, and also have our own heart convicted. How do I live in that spot, Lord? Where does my heart maybe need to be convicted in one of those areas or the other? Encourage you to check out that little compendium of little book you can get on Amazon or online, the compendium of Catholic social teaching.